Again, I welcome Senator Durbin as our new ranking member, as well as our new members. Our new members are Senator Schmidt, Britt, Schiff, and we also have a particular welcome to our new senator from the state of Florida, Senator Ashley Moody. Welcome. Today, the only item on the agenda is the vote on Pam Bondi's nomination to serve as Attorney General. Last week, committee Democrats exercised their right under the committee rules to hold the nomination for 7 days. We honored this hold last week, so today is the time to vote out Ms. Bondi's. 2 weeks ago, she testified before this committee. That was about 5 hours of testimony, giving us a chance to learn more about her and her priorities. What we learned is that she is a tough person, a career in prosecution, but also a fair career prosecutor who built her reputation by enforcing the rule of law. She spent 18 years serving as a prosecutor before being elected 2 terms as Florida Attorney General. Her record shows that she's willing to tackle and to solve some of the hardest problems facing our nation. As Florida's Attorney General, Ms. Bondi focused on human trafficking, led the fight against opioid pill mills, protected consumers, and sought justice for victims of violent criminals. Her record and her testimony showed the American people that she will follow through and enforce the law fairly, without fear or favor. On the second day of her hearing, we heard from witnesses who praised Ms. Bondi's character, her fairness, her willingness to work with members of both parties to solve hard problems. So we heard from an elected Democrat who never voted for President Trump. He told us that Ms. Bondi was fair, tethered to the rule of law, and could work with both Democrat and Republicans to serve the American people. We heard from Florida's statewide prosecutor, who praised her competence running the legal department of a third largest state of our nation. We heard from a Florida sheriff who testified about her commitment to law and order and her partnership with law enforcement to keep Floridians safe. These witnesses have worked with Ms. Bondi for decades, and they all vouched for her capability and character. Ms. Bondi's nomination has received a flood of support from all across America. Law enforcement groups representing more than 650,000 officers wrote to this committee and urged us to support the nomination. A few of these groups include the National Association of Police Organizations, the Fraternal Order of Police, National Sheriff's Association, Major County Sheriffs, National Narcotic Officers Association, International Association of Chiefs of Police, and many others. This support is a testament to Ms. Bondi's history of backing law enforcement. We also received letters from more than 100 former senior DOJ officials, scores of U.S. attorneys, dozens of state attorneys general, women's rights groups, Second Amendment groups, and others who all strongly support the nominee. I'd like to take a few minutes to address some of the attacks against Ms. Bondi. Several members of this committee characterized Ms. Bondi as an election denier, This is inconsistent with her own statements because on multiple occasions during her hearing, Ms. Bondi stated that President Biden was the president and that she, quote unquote, accepted the results. As I said during the hearing, questioning the results of an election does not make one an election denier. If this is the criteria by which we judge public officials, scores of Democrats, including some on this committee, are similarly situated. Minority Leader Schumer cast doubt on Senator Casey's loss to Pennsylvania just a few months ago. Hillary Clinton elected Democrats have called President Trump an illegitimate president and suggested the 2016 election was stolen. Stacey Abrams and even some members of this committee suggested the 2018 Georgia governor's election was, quote unquote, stolen. The attacks against Ms. Bondi on this point of a partisan double standard. Some of my colleagues also implied that Ms. Bondi's lobbying career should be disqualifying. This too was very unfair. Ms. Bondi disclosed her lobbying work and her clients to this committee beyond what she was even required to do. She's been more transparent than other recent nominees, and there is no reason to think that she would not follow the law and recuse herself when conflicts of interest are shown. Democrats didn't voice concern when one of President Biden's DOJ's nominees worked for China and Huawei during his time in private practice, nor did we hear concerns about former Attorney General Holder's lobbying activities. Now, when Senator Tillis pressed Democrat witness Ms. Jennifer Gilbert to articulate specific concerns with Ms. Bondi's lobbying career, she was unable to point to anything specific. She just kept repeating that Ms. Bondi's former clients would give, quote unquote, the appearance of impropriety. Vague assertions of potential conflicts of interest are not a reason to oppose a nominee who pledged to follow established procedures regarding these conflicts. Some of my colleagues also suggest that Ms. Bondi's loyalty to President Trump is somehow disqualifying. It is not persuasive in any way. There's nothing wrong with President Trump appointing someone who has fiercely defended him to a high position. Ms. Bondi publicly supported President Trump, just like 77 million Americans who voted him back into office in November. So this too is not a disqualifying attribute. The president has the right to choose an attorney general who is loyal and will faithfully carry out the vision for America that this president ran on. I note that Democrats did not voice concerns about the loyalty of Attorney General Holder, described himself as President Obama's wingman. And of course, we all remember that President John F. Kennedy appointed his own brother to serve as Attorney General. Many of my colleagues also suggested that Ms. Bondi was too partisan for a role at the Department of Justice. This is surprising to me, considering that many of my colleagues routinely voted for highly partisan DOJ officials and even judicial nominees over the last 4 years. And a few examples would be Vanita Gupta, who on opening night of the Republican National Convention in 2020 tweeted, quote, "Don't know if I can take 3 more nights of racism, xenophobia, and outrageous lies," end of quote. Matt Olson, Assistant Attorney General for National Security Divisions, was penned an op-ed to Time Magazine in 2016 entitled, quote, "Why ISIS Supports Donald Trump," end of quote. Judge Dale Ho, who suggested that his work was motivated by, quote, "hate for conservatives," end quote, and who described himself as a, quote, "wild-eyed sort of leftist," end of quote. These openly partisan statements didn't bother my colleagues, so if they're fair, they shouldn't be bothered by Ms. Bondi's support of President Trump. Finally, I want to address a smear from the legacy media who claimed that I was repeating a, quote, "discredited myth," end of quote, when I said that the, quote, FBI opened dozens of investigations into parents who voiced concern at school board meetings regarding curriculum choices and COVID-19 mandates, end of quote. To set the record straight, these are the facts. On October 4th, 2021, General Garland issued a memorandum directing law enforcement to address threats against school administrators and board members. This was in response to a letter requested by the National School Boards Association to President Biden that they later apologized for. That organization said, quote, "there was no justification for some of the language included in the letter." But that apology was too little, too late. By October 20th, 21, FBI Counterterrorism Division had acted on General Garland's directive and announced a new threat tag to use against parents voicing concerns. That threat tag was, quote, "EDU officials," end of quote, as in education officials. FBI whistleblowers came forward stating that, quote, "at least a dozen of investigations into parents," end of quote, and had been started using the new threat tag. As of October 27th, 2021, Senate Judiciary Oversight hearing, I directly asked Attorney General Garland to retract his memo. You know, he refused. On February 3rd, 2023, House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jim Jordan subpoenaed FBI Director Wray for documents related to the misuse, quote unquote, the misuse of federal and counterterrorism resources to target parents. In response to the subpoena, the FBI acknowledged for the first time that it opened 25, quote, guardian assessments, end quote, including 6 that were run by the FBI Counterterrorism Division. These government-funded and resourced investigations didn't identify any legitimate threats. I'll now turn to Ranking Member Durbin.
Thanks, Chairman Grassley. If you want to know the role of the Department of Justice